Bioshock 2, Bioshock Harder. This is the game that I was both dreading and also looking forward to. This is one of those weird games where, like, I've never played it, but I've owned it forever. I've also, like, played Bioshock, obviously a little bit, and then I played it for the first time in full this year. I'm a big fan of Bioshock Infinite. And this is that middle child where I never really gave it the time of day. And the reason is, the only two things I ever heard about this game were that it wasn't very good and that the DLC, Minerva's Den, was very good. That's like all I know. And that this game was made by a different studio than the ones that made Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite. But now that I've played the game, what do I think? What are my thoughts? Well, I have to admit, the game is nowhere near as bad as I was expecting it to be. I think, like, I kind of knew going into it that this is probably just going to be really similar to the first game, and that is pretty much the biggest takeaway. This game is basically just another Bioshock. I mean, it's Bioshock 2, but it is really just you're back in Rapture, same old world. It does take place after the events of Bioshock 1, which is cool, but this time you're playing as a brand new character, and the biggest change in this game is the fact that you're now playing as a Big Daddy, the big, monstrous, scary, terrifying enemies from the first game. Now you get to play as one. The only thing is that, like, luxury, if you will, dies off quickly. And that's because at the end of the day, even though you are playing as a Big Daddy, there really is no difference in the gameplay. The only real difference is that you get a drill arm as your main melee weapon, but I mean, essentially it is the same thing as the wrench from the first game, just with a new coat of paint. I mean, if anything, it actually is a little bit worse because it runs on fuel, which all great games have mechanics where you use weapons that run on fuel. But the thing is, like, with Bioshock 2, unfortunately, I mean, really the biggest drawback to the game, I would say, is the fact that it's just very derivative of the first game. Gameplay wise, it's almost identical. There's very little new that's in the game. The story is all new, the characters are all new, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're still just a guy going through Rapture, fighting Big Daddies, and hunting down this person. At the end of the day, there's not much more to it than that, and the story did not grip me the same way the first one did. One of the new elements the game does happen to introduce is the new enemy, which is the Big Sister, which I have to admit, absolutely loved. Like, such a great introduction to this new character, this new villain, if you will. And for the first few levels of the game, this Big Sister is hunting you, and it's like, it's actually genuinely scary, and you're like, oh god, freaking out about this confrontation you're eventually going to have. Unfortunately, only a few levels in, you finally fight the Big Sister, and then the Big Sister basically goes away, and the only time you ever see them again is whenever you use the morality system of rescuing or harvesting little sisters, which returns from the first game. Every couple times you do that, a Big Sister will spawn, but even then, it warns you with a ton of headway, like, hey, just, Big Sister's coming, so it's like, kind of loses the suspense, you know what I mean? So I feel like that was kind of disappointing. I was really looking forward to that kind of enemy type being so prevalent in the game, and it really isn't. The game tries to recreate a lot of the elements of the first game story-wise. I won't even spoil them here, but a lot of the patterns and story concepts introduced in the first game are pretty much just repeated here. There's really not a whole lot new, unfortunately. There's not even a whole lot new in terms of weapons. A lot of the plasmids are the same. There's a few new ones, I think, but I mean, overall, there's more of them, certainly. Like, I felt like you had a bigger selection, but a lot of them seem to just, the plasmids and tonics, they I don't know, they seem so derivative. A lot of them are like the same thing but better, and it's like, well, then why would you have the first one if you can just have the other one? My takeaway of this game was I enjoyed it for what I played. I mean, about halfway through the game, I kind of got that same feeling I did in the first one, where it felt very linear. There are a lot of side paths where you can go down and get new supplies or health or maybe a plasmid or tonic, but at the end of the day, it's like you don't really need to do that stuff. And as I went further along, I kind of just pushed forward to the main story, which is pretty much the same thing I did in the first game, except the difference was in the first game, I was doing that because I was so into the story, I wanted to know what happened next. In this one, it was more like, well, I just want to move things along. So unfortunately, yeah, Bioshock 2, it's okay. I see why people, dismissed it so much, because it is just essentially the first game again. But there's nothing wrong with that. I did want to also mention that I did play the standalone somewhat standalone DLC, Minerva's Den, which was highly praised. I know I got a lot of good reception, but I don't really see it. I mean, I think, like, as a whole, I think Minerva's Den probably is better because it's just like a 4-hour game or whatever compared to the main game, which is like, I don't know, 8 to 10 hours. So in that sense, I feel like, sure, it's better, but it only introduces one new weapon and one new plasmid, and yeah, the weapon is cool, but it's just like, Yeah, I mean, it's more of the same. It tells its own story that's separate from the events of Bioshock and Bioshock 2, which is commendable, but it also kind of leads off in a cliffhanger, I suppose, which, having played Bioshock Infinite, I know that leads nowhere. So, it's one of those games where it's like, I see what they were trying to do, and this is cool concept. I actually think the idea of doing a bunch of smaller Bioshock games would have been cool, but, that's not what history had for them, so unfortunately, that's where it leaves off. My final takeaway about Bioshock 2 is, I mean, I liked it. Like I said, the gameplay is very similar to the first one. So much like this video is derivative in the sense that I'm just repeating the same things over and over again, the game was derivative of the first one. So Bioshock 2 is in the books, and we're moving on to the next one, 35 games down. We're on our way, folks.